On July 10th of 2008, Tony Stewart would shock the NASCAR world when he would announce that he would be leaving Joe Gibbs Racing to become a driver-owner with Gene Haas to form Stewart-Haas Racing. Many thought that the move was a questionable one at best. However, Stewart would prove them wrong quickly by winning 4 races in SHR's inaugural season in the Cup Series and a championship victory only 2 years later. Throughout the 2010s, Stewart-Haas Racing was known as one of the powerhouse teams and were constant contenders to win the championship year in, year out. Hell, Kevin Harvick could even be regarded as the most dominant driver in the 2010s. Going into the 2020s, it seemed like everything would remain the same as SHR had Harvick win an impressive 10 races in the 2020 season. But as the years went by after 2020, the wins would come less and less and less, to the point that Stewart-Haas Racing looked like a shell of what it once was. Finally, in May of 2024, almost 16 years after their formation, the team announced that 2024 would be their last, leaving a legacy of 3 championships and 98 victories across the Cup and Xfinity Series. The worst part about it all is that the team is still looking for their first win of the season, even though they are a 4-car operation. A truly sad story for many in the NASCAR world, as we all witnessed a team who was almost untouchable into one that was mediocre at best. It seems almost impossible, but if you have been around this motorsport long enough, then you know that many teams have experienced exactly what Stewart-Haas Racing has all too many times. Some teams experience this decline rapidly, while others suffer the descent into obscurity for decades. We see this happen to drivers, but teams? Now that is a different story. Today we look into NASCAR teams that went from being championship contenders to an afterthought when it was all said and done. Let's dive into NASCAR teams that went from heroes to zeros. Number 1 is Carl Kiekhaefer's team. To kick this list off, we are going almost all the way back to the beginning to virtually the first dominant team that disappeared without a trace. Carl Kiekhaefer was not a typical NASCAR owner. In fact, he decided to join the world of car racing to help promote his boat motor company. He didn't go cheap either, as Carl would purchase Chrysler 300s, which were some of the fastest cars an owner could get their hands on. Not only that, Carl hired future NASCAR Hall of Famers to drive his equipment, which included Buck Baker and Tim Flock. Flock at the time was retired, but thanks to the big money that Kiekhaefer was bringing to the table, he couldn't resist. Entering the 1955 season, Kiekhaefer's team was beyond the strongest, with Tim Flock entering 38 events with 18 victories, 18 poles, and 32 top 10 finishes on his way to a NASCAR championship. It would surprisingly be the only season the duo competed together. More on that later. The following season, the team had Buck Baker as their primary driver, which led to the team winning another championship along with 14 victories. If that wasn't enough, Carl Kiekhaefer's secondary driver Speedy Thompson entered 39 events and won 8 races, leading to a 3rd place points finish in the standings. And just to add a little bit more to this team's success, the driver who finished second in the points standings was Herb Thomas, who only finished in that position thanks to Carl Kiekhaefer offering a ride for the summer stretch. Meaning that in that second year of operation, Kiekhaefer had a team that was virtually unbeatable in NASCAR's top division. Many wondered if anyone would be able to defeat this behemoth of a team. Well, believe it or not, the teams would figure out a way to beat Kiekhaefer's Chryslers, not by a competitive standpoint, but by a political standpoint. In 1957, many teams complained that Carl Kiekhaefer's team was cheating, which led to Brian France changing the rules to help the other teams, but not Kiekhaefer's team. Now, a situation like this would be frustrating for any team owner, but for Kiekhaefer, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Carl decided that the best call to action would be to just quit the sport, leaving a short but prosperous legacy without a second thought. Something that shocked the racing world, but not the people who were close to Carl Kiekhaefer. As for Tim Flock, the only reason why he didn't continue his partnership with the team was due to a major fallout with the departing owner, proving that burning bridges was not an isolated incident for the owner. Carl Kiekhaefer never returned back to NASCAR for full-time competition, and as quickly as they came as a dominant force, the triple-digit number NASCAR team went from championship contenders to urban legends within 3 years. Number 2, Junior Johnson and Associates. The Carl Kiekhaefer team is one that can be easily forgotten due to their short time in the sport. However, the same can't be said for Junior Johnson and Associates, who dominated the NASCAR circuit for over 20 years. The team was first started as a car for Junior Johnson to drive in a selected amount of races, but by the late 1960s, drivers of the likes of Bobby Isaac, Curtis Turner, and Leroy Yarbrough started running his equipment, the most successful being Leroy Yarbrough with multiple victories, including a Daytona 500. By the time the modern era of NASCAR came in 1972, Junior Johnson and Associates switched from the Chrysler brand to the Chevrolet brand and picked up some of the most legendary drivers for the next 20 years. Drivers of the likes of Bobby Allison, Cale Yarbrough, Darrell Waltrip, Terry Labonte, and Neil Bonnet at one point drove for Junior Johnson and Associates. Each driver was able to score multiple victories for the team, but the two standouts were definitely Yarbrough and Waltrip, who both won 3 championships each with their time with the team. The team throughout the 1970s and 80s was a complete powerhouse, and teams knew that they could never be counted out as they always had a trick up their sleeve to stay one step ahead.
$200,000 and he blows up! Going in the first corner, he blew up. What a Hollywood ending!
I tell you what, Junior Johnson will be glad to throw that in the garbage can.
By 1992, the team looked to carry on with a new legendary run with Bill Elliott, who at first looked to have a championship in his hands, but the team fumbled the second half of the season and had the likes of Davey Allison and Alan Kawicki crawl their way back into the championship contention. Alan Kawicki, a driver-owner in the sport, was able to defeat one of the most dangerous teams in the sport, leading to Junior Johnson and Associates having a slow decline for the next 3 years. After firing Tim Brewer, the crew chief for Elliott in 1992, Junior Johnson and Associates struggled to stay as competitive as they were once before, thanks to sponsorship issues and drivers not filling the shoes for other drivers who walked away. Ironically, by the end of the 1994 season, Bill Elliott left the number 11 car in pursuit of starting his own driver-owner team, leaving the team with even less sponsorship. By 1995, Junior Johnson had a 2-car team with Brett Bodine driving his 11 car to a 20th point finish, as well as his secondary car struggling to even make races. Johnson would eventually sell the team to his current driver, Brett Bodine, by the end of the 1995 season, and the team became another driver-owner team, the same type of team that brought them down in the 1992 season. Number 3 is Melling Racing. If Melling Racing doesn't sound familiar, then their first driver behind the wheel will definitely remind you of this team. Melling Racing was a team that started in the Cup Series in 1982 on a part-time basis, before moving full-time the year after. Their driver was a young kid that grew up in a small town of Dawsonville, Georgia, named Bill Elliott. This team throughout the 1980s was known as one of the fastest teams in NASCAR, especially at the biggest and fastest tracks, as no one could ever keep up with Bill Elliott in his iconic number 9 car. With 2 Daytona 500 wins, 34 victories, and 1 championship, the duo was virtually unstoppable and looked to carry on their success into the 1990s. That was until Junior Johnson was able to convince the Georgia native to run his equipment, taking almost all the sponsorship money away from Melling Racing. This immediately put the once championship caliber team back to a part-time basis, picking up whatever driver they could to run their equipment with financial backing. The team eventually returned to full-time racing in 1995 with Lake Speed, but sadly, the results were nowhere near comparable to what the team was achieving less than a decade prior. Instead of finishing in the top 5 in points, Melling Racing was only lucky enough to scrape a couple top 10s each season and finish 23rd or worse in the owner standings. Things only got worse for the team when longtime owner Harry Melling passed away from a heart attack at age 53. His son Mark would be left to pick up the pieces and continued racing the team for 3 more years before calling it quits in the NASCAR Cup Series. By then, the team was struggling to even make races and still struggling to find sponsorship, the same issue that started their downfall in 1992. Number 4 is Roush Racing. Now, to be fair for Roush Racing, the team has definitely stepped up their program thanks to the new alliance with Brad Keselowski. Both cars have seen victory lane in the last year, so for many Roush Racing fans, this is a great sight. However, the previous decade was truly a struggle for the team. In the early 2000s, many would consider the top team to not be Hendrick Motorsports, but rather Roush Racing. With their driver lineup consisting of Carl Edwards, Greg Biffle, Kurt Busch, Matt Kenseth, and Mark Martin, the team looked to be an unstoppable force, as by 2005 they won both the 2003 and 2004 championship and had all their drivers secure 50% of the spots for the chase for the Cup playoffs. However, this would be the time the cracks started to show for the team, as two of their drivers were on their way out, being Mark Martin, who was going part-time in his career, and Kurt Busch, who was going full outlaw in his career. The team still remained competitive in the COT era thanks to both Matt Kenseth and Carl Edwards remaining championship factors. However, no new talent was stepping up for the team as the years progressed. By the time the Gen 6 cars were introduced to the Cup Series, both Carl Edwards and Matt Kenseth jumped on over to Joe Gibbs Racing, leaving the once dominant 5-driver team virtually gone by 2015. By then, only Greg Biffle remained along with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Trevor Bayne. But unfortunately, the team was never even close to being championship contenders by the end of the 2010s. In fact, Chris Buescher last year was the first driver to finish inside the top 10 in owner points in over 9 years for the organization, which is a step in the right direction, but miles from what the team used to be. And number 5 is Petty Enterprises. Richard Petty will now and forever be known as the King of NASCAR. That title will never be taken away thanks to his 7 championships and 200 victories. This was almost all accomplished with Richard Petty's own family team, Petty Enterprises. In 1949, Lee Petty brought Petty Enterprises its first run of success with a victory in the team's 5th race in the series. Throughout the 1950s, Lee Petty continued the success of Petty Enterprises with over 50 wins and even 3 championships. During this time, Lee Petty's son, Richard Petty, was starting his career with the team and not only followed in the same footsteps as his dad, but rose Petty Enterprises to a whole new level. As Lee Petty's career came to an abrupt end in 1961, Richard Petty picked up the pieces and went on an absolute tear throughout the 60s and 70s. Petty basically won everything from dirt tracks, paved tracks, short tracks, super speedways, weekday races, crown jewel events, and of course, championships. By 1980, Petty Enterprises amassed 10 championships and over 250 victories thanks to the father and son dominance over the competition. But as the team entered the 1980s, age started to affect the team, and the team that was once unstoppable was turning into just another team on the entry list. Instead of running for championships year in and year out, Richard Petty and now his son Kyle Petty were just trying to finish in the top 10 in points. No longer were the fans seeing Petty Enterprises running for victories, but instead by the end of the 1980s, the team was just trying to qualify into races. Richard Petty was past his prime, and Kyle Petty was not meeting the same standards as his father and grandfather. In 1992, Richard Petty decided to call it a career, leading to Petty Enterprises heading into the future without a dominant Petty behind one of their vehicles. After this, the team jumped around with multiple drivers, including Rick Wilson, Bobby Hamilton, John Andretti, Buckshot Jones, Christian Fittipaldi, Jeff Green, Bobby Labonte, Reed Sorensen, and the list continues of drivers that look to fill in the spots of what Richard Petty and Lee Petty did all those years ago. Sure, some drivers were able to score wins, but it was nothing comparable to what it once was. By the 2009 season, the now named Richard Petty Motorsports was merging with other organizations in hopes to stay competitive. It led to a victory here and there, but again, nothing like before. By 2023, the team no longer had the Petty name, instead merging with another 7-time champion of Jimmy Johnson to form Legacy Motor Club. This has allowed Johnson to return, but sadly, the results have been mediocre for Richard Petty's team. Seeing Jimmy Johnson's return to a part-time schedule with his dual alliance with Richard Petty has been fascinating to witness, because if we look closely, we can almost be brought back to Richard Petty's final years in the sport, showing a mirror image of when Petty Enterprises first started to ascend down to near obscurity. And that was my list of teams that went from heroes to zeros. Thank you so much for watching. Was there any teams that you'd like me to talk about in the future in this format? Please let me know, along with other videos that you would like to see down in the comment section. Make sure to like and subscribe, and as always guys, you all take care.